Hey there, this is Mr. Icarus, and welcome to yet another edition of Doom Mod Madness. This time around, we're checking out Cold as Hell, a Doom mod that maroons us in a besieged weapons research base located deep in the frozen heart of Greenland. Another thing worth noting about the setup here too is that this mod is actually set around the mid-50s, meaning that when it comes to weaponry, we won't really be able to rely on the modern luxuries of things like plasma guns and the occasional BFG. Anyway, I'm getting a little ahead of myself because Cold as Hell starts off as a little bit of a slow burn. It has you exploring this seemingly abandoned opening base here where you're walking around, finding notes, and trying to piece together what exactly has occurred here. But one thing that certainly grabbed me straight away about Cold as Hell was the sheer sense of atmosphere that this opening section is able to generate. It's genuinely creepy. I mean, it's not doing anything particularly fancy with the textures or the lighting, but still, for a mod that's almost a decade old, it does a damn fine job of instilling a fairly genuine sense of dread, something that makes you curious to learn more about what happened here, and fortunately, you don't really have to wait long before you encounter something monstrous that you can shoot in the face. As with most horrific situations, it starts in a blood-spattered bathroom, and before you know it, you're facing down an eyeless, somewhat jawless, imp-styled freak that makes, what I've got to admit, is a genuinely creepy noise. Seriously, that strange breathing sound they make is worse than the look. It's something that you can hear all around you when the shit finally hits the fan, and this is certainly when the game shifts into a different kind of gear. This is the pace that it kind of maintains for the duration of the rest of the mod, and it's certainly a different kind of pace from what the opening may imply, but it's not quite as gung-ho as you may imagine. I mean, sure, you get to blast a fair few things in the face with a shotgun, but there's a few things you've got to be very aware of if you want to survive. First of those would be the good old manual reload, and here it's not just simply a case of holding down R and watching all those shells pump into the shotgun. You're actually going to have to hold down that button if you want to get the maximum amount of shells chambered. As you can imagine, this can lead to a lot of quite tense situations. The trade-off between fully reloading your shotgun and trying not to soak up damage, especially in confined situations, can be a little hair-raising. Thankfully, you can choose to partially reload your shotgun, but that can sometimes leave you in the lurch, especially if you're also dealing with slightly more bullet-spongy enemies. Another aspect of Cold as Hell that's critical to your survival is understanding that enemies here generally hit like a freight train. Do not be fooled by the familiar exteriors. These demons will really tear your face off if they get too close, and being hit by those fireballs isn't really a pleasant experience either. You'll notice on the health bar that I also have a number of bandages available to me, and that's because Cold as Hell also incorporates a bleed mechanic. Obviously, bandages fix bleeding. You just need to switch to the item, hold down the trigger for a few seconds until it's stopped, and then you can get back on your merry way where you'll have your face bitten off by a pinky. It's here that I like to draw a parallel between dealing with bleed damage and reloading the shotgun, because both of them require you to pick your moments very wisely. Both of them leave you vulnerable and wide open to attack while you deal with the issue at hand. It certainly leads to an air of desperation about the battles that you fight here, because it's less about exterminating everything in front of you, but just carving out enough time to get a little space between you and your enemy, getting a little bit of quiet time around the corner so you can patch up your wounds. But the thing about Cold as Hell is that nowhere really feels safe. This level in particular is a great example of that, because despite all of these buildings that you can dart inside for some assumed shelter, you'll notice that there's these great big breakable windows adorning the outside of them, and those are just as easily broken by demons as yourself. Another neat thing about Cold as Hell is that once you beat this particular section of game, it actually opens up into a much more non-linear experience. You get these various access hatches that will lead you to other sections of the base, and that's where you discover that you aren't exactly alone here. For example, this section of map, which is the main barracks, will actually have you fighting alongside a platoon of soldiers, aiming to take back this section from the demonic scourge that's besieged it. It's certainly a relief after having to deal with the demons one-on-one up until this point, but I can't help but feel that Cold as Hell slightly loses something here. That air of desperation fades ever so slightly as you realize you can rely on these NPC allies every now and again to pick up the slack. Don't get me wrong, the demons are still as lethal as they were before, but I feel like I just prefer the experience more when it seems like it's just me versus the demon underworld. If there's a section of Cold as Hell where I'd say it sags ever so slightly, I definitely point towards this particular section here. This is the staff housing map, and there's nothing overtly awful about it. It's perfectly fine in comparison to the rest of the maps that you run through here in Cold as Hell. It's more the task that you have to achieve within it that irks me. Basically, you need to hunt down several pages of access codes. I think it's 9 in total that you have to locate, and I've never really been a fan of fetch quests when it comes to having to poke your nose into every single possible section of a map. And where this problem compounds itself is that a lot of this map unfortunately looks the same as the rest of the map, bar the doors that obviously have "Use this key here" signs plastered right at the top of them. What ultimately annoyed me most, however, was that the final note you had to acquire wasn't located as a traditional note scattered around the map. It was in fact hidden within another note that you have to read instead. And at the time I didn't really have my note controls bound, which enables you to scroll back and forth between certain written notes, and I spent a uncomfortably long amount of time just wandering in circles trying to figure out where the ever-loving hell that bloody note had gotten to. As for the other sections you'll be visiting, thankfully they turn out to be a lot more interesting. This one in particular has you going through the depths of a power station in order to disengage auxiliary power and restore main power, before ultimately heading off a small demon army fronted by 2 cyber demons. I have to admit, first time I saw that I thought, you gotta be kidding me. And then the cyber demons turned out to be a little bit weaker than anticipated. On the other side of things, those codes I rifled from staff housing granted me access to the armory where I could resupply on weapons, set some more soldiers free, and ultimately take a rather entertaining jeep trip across the tundra to an abandoned World War II base where I was able to radio for help before taking another hair-raising trip back, dodging projectiles or attempting to dodge projectiles the entire way. As you can see, it's a pretty damn cool section, one that breaks up the action nicely despite the embarrassing number of deaths I suffered in the process of actually trying to get through it. With those sections ultimately conquered, Cold as Hell moves into its final phase, having you traipse between buildings in the research complex, one of which housing the root cause of all of this demonic mayhem. At this point, Cold as Hell has also managed to build a fair amount of anticipation, because during the course of your travels, you will have been able to read a number of written notes, as well as access various audio logs. You may have seen me playing one of the tapes at the beginning of this video, and these will actually give you a bit of backstory to what's going on, and will also give you a few insights into what you'll need to do in order to end all of it. If there's one thing I certainly have to give credit to in this mod, however, it's the inclusion of the objectives list, because I could imagine this could be a lot more confusing and a fair bit more frustrating if you were just left to your own devices, but instead the objectives list, which you'll have seen pop up at the top of the screen every now and again, does a great job of giving you a nudge in the right direction, giving you a few hints as to what you may need to look for or actually do. As a result, I never really truly felt lost. The only ever confusion I felt was mainly searching for items in one particular area that I knew I already needed to be in. If I had to pick a favorite part of Cold as Hell, I'd have to say that this final section here was probably the one that I enjoyed the most, and this is because of that aforementioned anticipation. You've read multiple accounts up until this point that things get a little strange the closer you get to the source of all this craziness. And Cold as Hell certainly delivers on the strangeness of the situation. You'll get rooms like these where all the color drains out of the environment. You'll get other sections where the room has apparently flipped upside down. You'll even get corridors where the textures on the walls start to wobble and wave in a very disconcerting manner. You certainly get the sense that reality here seems to be breaking down, and it's all the more effective for the fact that up until this very last section of game, things have been relatively normal. Well, demon invasion-wise at the very least. So, all in all, is it worth it? Is Cold as Hell worth playing for the duration? And I've got to say yes, it is. It's a mod that drew me in the longer I stuck with it. I actually picked this up not expecting to enjoy it as much as I did, but there's something about the mishmash of elements at work here that clicks. I mean, the survival element, although a little irritating to deal with, does serve a purpose. It does ramp up the tension when you're in the middle of a fight. You've got to be constantly aware that you're not taking that bleed damage. You've got to run for cover. You can't just be as gung-ho as you'd normally like to be in a Doom mod. It also requires you to be a little bit more attentive than usual. You've got to regard those notes a little bit more carefully, some of them actively pointing you in the right direction. But ultimately, it's just a really well-built mod that offers a little bit of a different pace from the usual. Does it have its flaws? Sure, I mean, visually, this mod ain't no spring chicken. There's certainly prettier mods out there these days, but what this has works. It's nothing that's gonna make me puke out of sheer revulsion. What I could do without, however, is the big giant text boxes that occasionally pop up whenever you acquire a new weapon. They take up a fair portion of the screen and aren't really all that helpful when it comes to, surviving. I don't really need to know the specs of the weapon I'm picking up. I mean, tops, I just need to know the name of the thing. But in terms of a few final nitpicks, projectiles could stand to be a lot easier to see. Sometimes they blended into the snow, leading to a lot of unfortunate and otherwise avoidable deaths, and I could have possibly done with a little bit more enemy variety, something to mix up the standard Doom peanut gallery. But otherwise, yeah, it's a pretty damn solid mod. The exploration felt well-paced, the story and the way it was delivered kept me engaged. There was even some understandable voice acting scattered around the place here, which in of itself for a mod is pretty impressive, so well done. Naturally though, there's a few things about this mod that I've either glossed over or kept a little vague, because ultimately I'd like you folks to be able to experience it for yourself. And if you're interested in doing so, the link, as usual, is in the description below. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video. Feel free to let me know what you thought in the comments below, and feel free to suggest any mods you'd like to see me cover in future episodes of Doom Mod Madness. This has been Mr. Icarus. Thank you very much for watching. Icarus out.